We can't talk about dominance without starting with New Zealand. The Black Ferns are more than just a top team. They are the most successful women's rugby side in history. 6 Rugby World Cup titles. That's not a stat, that's a statement. And it tells you something about the rugby DNA in that country. What sets the Black Ferns apart isn't just their skill level, it's their style. Their game is fast, fluid and instinctive. They attack with flair, but they're also incredibly disciplined defensively. When they play, it feels like every player knows exactly where the ball is going 3 phases ahead. Their success isn't accidental. New Zealand has a strong domestic competition in the Farah Palmer Cup, and they've recently introduced Super Rugby Aupiki to mirror the men's format. That's already starting to pay off, especially in developing depth across all positions. Now, if the Black Ferns are queens of instinctive rugby, England are the masters of structure and control. The Red Roses have been finalists in the last 2 World Cups and won it in 2014. What makes them stand out is how thoroughly planned and physically dominant they are. England plays a forward-heavy game, rolling mauls, set-piece dominance and relentless pressure. Their pack is well drilled, and their kicking game is incredibly effective. They're not just trying to outplay you, they're trying to wear you down. The support for the women's game in England is also massive. The Premier 15s, now rebranded as Premiership Women's Rugby, has been a game changer. It's one of the most competitive women's leagues in the world and has created a conveyor belt of talent. Names like Marley Packer, Zoe Aldcroft and Emily Scarrett have become household names among rugby fans. But what's even more impressive is the depth. England can rotate their squad and still maintain the same level of execution. France might be the most unpredictable of the powerhouses. On their day, they can beat anyone. They haven't won a World Cup yet, but they've been close. Several semi-final appearances, a few third-place finishes, and always that feeling that they could do more. Their style is classic French rugby, physical and emotional, but also creatively explosive. You get solid set pieces, but also off-the-cuff brilliance in broken play. Players like Gabrielle Vernier and Romain Ménager can completely change a game with a single run or defensive play. France also has one of the most supportive home crowds. When they play in front of French fans, especially in the Six Nations, you feel that energy. And in terms of structure, their league, Elite One, is growing steadily, though not quite as developed as England's. Canada often gets overlooked in the wider rugby world, but it shouldn't be. They've reached the final of a Rugby World Cup in 2014 and are regularly ranked in the top 4 or 5. Their women's team is far more successful than their men's, and it's largely because of the grassroots systems that have quietly been working in the background. Canada's strength is in athleticism and physicality. Their forwards are tough, and their backline, especially in recent years, has become faster and more confident. Players like Sophie de Goede, arguably the best number, 8 in the world, lead with both skill and presence. What they've lacked historically is consistent international competition. They don't have a professional domestic league, and many of their top players head to Europe to play club rugby. But with WXV now offering more fixtures and exposure, that gap is closing. Australia is an interesting case. They have the history, they have the athletes, and they certainly have the rugby culture. But for a long time the Wallaroos weren't getting the same level of attention or investment as their male counterparts, or even their Sevens side, which has been wildly successful. In recent years that's started to change, with Super W becoming more competitive and more players getting overseas experience. The Wallaroos have started to climb again. They made it to the quarterfinals in 2021, 2022, and they've started to push the top teams more regularly. Players like Grace Hamilton and Arabella McKenzie are leading that charge, and the push for full-time contracts is finally giving them the platform to train and play at a higher level year-round. The USA were the first ever Women's Rugby World Cup champions in 1991. That's right, they were the original queens of the game, and they remained a top team through the 90s. But while the rest of the world invested and professionalised, the Eagles plateaued. There's still so much raw athletic talent in the US. Their Sevens programme is strong, and many of their players cross over into 15s. But the challenge is the domestic structure. With no professional league and limited central contracts, players are often training on their own, juggling jobs and flying in for camps. That being said, there's hope. More players are signing with clubs in England and France, and there's renewed interest in growing the women's game stateside, especially with the US set to host the 2033 Women's World Cup. Players like Kate Zachary and Ilona Maher, also a 7-star, are helping keep the profile high. So those are the big names, the teams that have already built something solid. But women's rugby isn't just about history, it's about momentum. And right now, a wave of countries is rising fast. Italy's rise in women's rugby has been one of the more underrated stories in the sport. For years, they were the team you expected to finish near the bottom of the Six Nations table, but in the last decade, they've completely changed that narrative. They've qualified for every Women's Rugby World Cup since 1991, but the major turning point came around 2015 when they began to consistently finish above Scotland and Wales in the Six Nations. In 2019, they came second in the tournament, ahead of France. That wasn't luck. That was structure, discipline, and tactical evolution. Their strength lies in their organisation. They play smart rugby. Their set piece is stable, their defensive line holds, and they know how to stay in the fight for 80 minutes. They don't have the star power of a New Zealand or an England, but they don't need it. They're methodical, well-drilled, and slowly building depth. Wales always had the passion, but for a long time they didn't have the structure. Their women's programme was underfunded and underdeveloped. While the men's game thrived, the women were left behind. That's changed, and the results are starting to reflect it. In 2022, Wales handed out full-time professional contracts to their players for the first time. That moment was huge. It allowed their athletes to train, recover, and compete like professionals, not part-timers. And in that same year, you saw a noticeable improvement in their performance. Their results in the Six Nations became tighter. Their physicality went up. Their stamina improved. Players like Jasmine Joyce and Hannah Jones have led the charge, and now there's a genuine belief that Wales isn't just participating anymore, they're building something that could be sustainable. Scotland are in a similar position to Wales, though a bit earlier in the process. For years they struggled with depth and consistency. Wins were rare and performances often dipped after half-time. But now, you can tell they've put serious work into rebuilding. One of the key steps was awarding full-time contracts to key players and expanding their high-performance programmes. It gave the team structure and allowed them to build cohesion. The results aren't explosive yet, but they are steady. In 2023, they won their final 3 matches of the WX5-2 tournament, finishing strong and showing that they can put teams away when the momentum shifts. Players like Jade Conkle-Roberts bring physicality, and they've got a good mix of experienced leaders and emerging talent. Ireland is a bit of a unique case in this group. They're not just a rising force, they were already at the top once. In 2013 and 2015, Ireland were Six Nations champions. In 2014, they famously beat New Zealand in the World Cup. That was a seismic result, but after that golden run, things fell apart. There were issues with governance, underinvestment, and a widening gap between the domestic and international game. The team failed to qualify for the 2022 World Cup, a major setback for a country with its history. That failure triggered the change. Ireland has now introduced professional contracts, revamped its talent pathways, and brought in new coaching leadership. The IRFU came under pressure from fans and former players, and while the response was slow, it has finally come. South Africa's women's team is one of the most physically imposing sides in the game. Their players bring incredible strength and athleticism. But what's been missing is consistency and access to the kind of structured competition that helps teams refine their skill sets. Historically, the Springbok women haven't had the same institutional support as the men's team. That's been slowly changing. Participation is up. Their domestic league is growing. And they've qualified for the last 2 World Cups. In 2022, they hosted the WX Vive 2 tournament, a huge moment for the visibility of women's rugby in the country. The challenge for South Africa isn't athleticism, they've got that in abundance. It's about decision making, game management and adapting to pressure. That comes with playing more Tier 1 opposition and investing in coaching and development. Japan is one of the most organised teams in this tier. You watch them play and it's immediately clear that they train with precision. Their passing is crisp, their lines are sharp and their work rate is consistent. They're not the most powerful team physically, but they make up for that with technique and discipline. Their defence is solid and their attack relies on quick recycling and exploiting space, especially out wide. Think of them as the team that will force you to play on their terms if you're not careful. The Japanese Rugby Union has been investing in the women's programme, especially after hosting the 2019 Men's World Cup and seeing the impact it had on the sport. More Japanese women are playing in competitive environments both domestically and overseas, so that's the rising pack. They're not at the summit yet, but they're climbing fast. Some have the experience, others have the potential, but they're all changing the landscape of women's rugby in real time. Now let's talk about something a little different, the teams that have made their name not in the 15s, but in 7s. Because in many parts of the world, 7s has been the entry point. We already talked about Fiji in the rising 15s teams, but they truly shine in 7s. The Fijiana 7s squad is everything you'd expect from Fijian rugby. Unpredictable, fast and fearless. They're not afraid to take risks. They'll throw offloads under pressure, run it from their try line and back themselves in one-on-one situations. What makes them special is that they don't try to copy other teams. Their style is unique and when it works, it's devastating. At the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, held in 2021, Fijiana shocked the world by beating Great Britain and winning bronze. That was a massive achievement, not just for Fiji, but for the visibility of women's rugby in the Pacific Islands. Brazil is another team that's embraced 7s as its main platform. They don't have a long history in the 1500s, and the sport hasn't traditionally been a major part of the national sports culture, but the women's 7s team, known as As Yaras, has become a point of national pride. They've dominated the South American scene for years, winning multiple regional titles and consistently qualifying for the World Rugby 7s series. What stands out is their athleticism. Brazil's players are quick, agile and tireless. They might not match the physicality of the top tier teams, but they make up for it with speed and energy. Their style is sharp, lots of short passes, quick footwork and smart positioning. And like Fiji, they're starting to invest in 15s as well, though the infrastructure is still developing. China entered the women's 7s game with a long-term plan. They aren't flashy and they don't have a deep rugby culture, but what they do have is organisation. The Chinese Rugby Football Association has poured funding into women's 7s, and you can see the results. They qualified for the Tokyo Olympics and have put in solid performances on the 7s series circuit. Their game is built around fitness and discipline. They rarely make unforced errors, and their defensive structure is very solid. Unlike Brazil or Fiji, China hasn't made big moves in 15s yet. Their focus is clearly on 7s. It's where the medals are, where the global spotlight shines, and where you can grow the sport quickly. For a country like China, that's a logical entry point. Kenya's women's sevens team, the Lionesses, has become a fixture in African rugby. They've represented Africa at the Olympics and have consistently challenged South Africa for dominance in the region. Their game is built on pace and physicality. Kenya's athletes are strong and explosive, and when they get into open space, they're hard to stop. They don't have as many opportunities to play on the World Rugby Sevens Series circuit, but when they do, they leave an impression. One of their biggest challenges is funding. The talent is there, the desire is there, but they need more consistent competition and infrastructure. Kenya doesn't have a strong domestic league for women, and travel costs often limit how many international events they can attend, but every time they get that opportunity, they gain valuable experience. Thailand might not be a household name in rugby, but their women's sevens programme is quietly developing into one of the most well organised in Asia. They've been regulars at the Asia Rugby Women's Sevens Series and have put up competitive performances against the likes of Japan and China. What makes Thailand interesting is how focused they are on technical skills. Their passing is smooth, their spacing is intelligent, and they know how to keep possession. They're not as physical as the Tier 1 teams, but they make up for that with clean execution and clever decision making. Papua New Guinea's women's sevens team is one of the most resilient squads out there. They've played on the Sevens Series as an invitational side and regularly compete in the Oceania Sevens circuit. Their story is one of grit. They don't have much funding, travel is expensive, and they train under tough conditions, but they keep showing up, and every year they improve. PNG has raw talent, strong runners, powerful tacklers, and a fighting spirit that keeps them in games even when the odds are stacked. But there's one more group we haven't talked about, the new and emerging nations. The ones just starting to figure out who they are in women's rugby. But before we talk about that, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you. Colombia has made some serious strides in recent years. Most people didn't even know they had a rugby team until 2019 when they started getting results in South America. But this team is organised, determined, and full of athletes who believe in what they're building. In 2020, they beat Brazil to qualify for the final Olympic repechage tournament in sevens. A massive step considering Brazil had long dominated the region. And in 2022, their women's 15s team nearly pulled off a World Cup qualification by beating Kenya in the semi-final of the repechage. They're still a Tier 3 team, no doubt, but they've got the fundamentals: aggressive defence, high work rate, and a growing domestic scene. Colombia is also investing in coaching, a big deal when you're trying to level up. You probably remember Kazakhstan as a regional power from the earlier days of women's rugby. They qualified for multiple World Cups and once dominated Asia. But things have changed. Funding dropped, their rivals caught up, and Kazakhstan has had to hit reset. Right now, their 15s team is in transition. They're still competing in Asia rugby tournaments, but it's clear they're in rebuild mode, trying to bring in younger players, find consistent coaching, and get back to regular competition. India might seem like an unlikely rugby nation, but the potential is enormous. With a population of over 1 billion and a growing interest in non-traditional sports, women's rugby is starting to catch a spark. It's still early days. The team is made up largely of players from small, rural areas, many of whom had never left their villages before playing for the national side. But that's exactly what makes this so impressive. The commitment is real. India is starting with sevens. It's more accessible and cheaper to develop. They've competed in Asian tournaments and even won matches against teams like Singapore and Laos. The athletes are raw but incredibly committed. If India ever gets serious national investment, even a fraction of what cricket receives, the game could explode. If you want a true underdog story, Madagascar might be your favourite team. They've shocked the African rugby scene by beating teams with more funding and infrastructure. In the Rugby Africa Women's Cup, they've held their own against Kenya and even pushed South Africa in moments. Their players are aggressive, unafraid, and incredibly physical. And despite having almost no formal domestic league, they keep producing players who compete with intensity. Portugal is one of those countries that doesn't make a lot of noise, but if you look closely, they're doing the work. They've made progress in sevens, where their women's team is consistently participating in the European Championship circuit. Their 15s team isn't a powerhouse, but they've started playing more test matches and recently earned a few solid wins over teams like the Czech Republic and Belgium. It's not headline-grabbing stuff, but it's steady. Mexico's women's team is a great example of growth under pressure. They have very few resources, limited exposure to top-level competition, and still, they keep showing up. In the Rugby Americas North tournaments, they've pulled off results against more established teams like Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. Their sevens programme has been the entry point. It's easier to develop and gives their athletes access to more international play. They've also begun laying the groundwork for a women's 15s programme, a tough task in a country where rugby is still a niche sport. The Philippines women's rugby team, often called the Lady Volcanoes, is small in size but massive in heart. Many of their players are based overseas, often from Filipino communities in Australia, the US, and New Zealand. That mix of local and diaspora talent gives the squad a unique identity. They've been working on both sevens and 15s development, with sevens getting more traction so far. Their big challenge is depth. With such a small domestic scene, it's hard to build consistent squads year after year. Sri Lanka has been trying to build women's rugby for over a decade, but the progress has been slow. The country has a strong tradition in men's sevens. They've even played in the Commonwealth Games, but that success hasn't yet translated to the women's game. The women's team does compete in the Asian Sevens series, but funding is tight and visibility is limited. The good news is that interest is growing, especially at the university level. If they can start to build youth academies and invest in coaching, they've got a chance. And that's the full picture every national women's rugby team explained. From world champions to rising nations, sevens specialists to first-time dreamers, this sport is so much more than what you see on the highlight reels. It's a patchwork of cultures, struggles, breakthroughs, and belief. What's clear is that women's rugby isn't just growing, it's evolving. Teams are no longer just surviving, they're building legacies. They're pushing for more funding, better opportunities, and real respect. And with every tournament, with every jersey pulled on, the sport gets stronger. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.